Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, get to introduce and interview some really fascinating people who give it a lot of insight to this crazy business we're in of self-publishing and writing and becoming authors. And today we have a very special guest who I am hugely excited to talk to, as I'm sure Craig is as well, Amy Bernstein. Who is an author-certified non-fiction book coach and an author herself. And before we begin, I have to ask, are you any relation to the Bernstein Bears?
That's Berenstain Bears. But it's been a long time, since I was asked about those wonderful stories, and there is no relation, I'm sorry to say.
No, there's this strange thing called the Mandela effect, where some people remember it as Bernstein, where it's the Berenstain, and it's always such an interesting thing to bring up. They were wonderful books. Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, we are very excited to have you. And of course, we have the man himself, the founder and owner of Hidden Gems Books and an author himself, Craig. Good morning, Craig. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Roland. And thanks for coming on, Amy. I am excited to talk to you because book coach is a thing that I don't hear about that much. It could be that I'm the only one who doesn't hear about it that much. Maybe everybody else knows about it, but I think that there's probably a lot of authors out there that aren't even aware of this sort of thing, and it would be really useful to them. So I'm excited to hear all about it. So hopefully you can give us sort of an overview, like what does a book coach do?
Sure. And you want me to just leap right in on that?
Sure, why not?
Okay. Well, let's begin with, first of all, Craig, no, you are not the only one. Book coaching is very much an evolving and an up-and-coming thing. While it's not new, many people have been doing book coach type work for some years. It's becoming more of a recognized and really much needed specialty, particularly considering that more people are writing books or trying to write books than ever before. I think the pandemic spurred on a lot of people to begin writing, and because publishing has become a tool that's in the hands of the writer, self-publishing has become so easy that barriers to entry for authors have lowered, and therefore more people are flooding in to write books. Now, it would be wonderful if everybody wrote really good books. And book coaches help people write the best possible books that they can. And so I am certified through a program called Author Accelerator, which is founded by Jenny Nash, who is an incredibly successful and astute book coach. And, Jenny had the insight that this is a form of expertise that really could be codified in a way. I'm trained and have access to a very specific set of tools to really help nurture a writer through the long process of figuring out what that book is about, who the ideal reader is, how should the chapters flow, what do you really have to say, what's your point, where does your book land on the shelf? Many questions that writers don't always stop to ask themselves early on. But let me also draw a really quick distinction between about what a book coach is not before we get into what a book coach really is and does. So most people think, well, is that just a fancy name for an editor? And it's quite different because most editors, for the most part, are really dealing with text. They're really focused on the text that a writer has produced. A book coach has a much more holistic relationship with the writer, in that the book coach will be an accountability partner all the way through a writing project, will offer that author very specific tools at certain points in time in the writer's process to help them through a lot of the muddle and to achieve clarity on what they're writing about, and will really be a champion with that author. Now, on the nonfiction side, book coaches also help authors get to the point where they can develop a really stellar nonfiction proposal to bring to the marketplace. So that's an extremely quick overview of a little bit about what a book coach does and doesn't. And I'm sure you've got questions.
Yeah, well, that's true. We think of it in terms of sort of when you're going through that, I'm thinking of different things that are sort of complementary to those things. Like you're saying, it's not an editor, which I definitely understand, but it reminds me a bit of developmental editing, right? Because
Right.
they help a lot of that stuff too. But what they don't do I mean, they take it once the book is done, right? You're starting at the beginning with the author, and your relationship with them sounds like is throughout the entire writing process, which could be a long period of time, right? I mean, some people can write a book in a month, and other people, it takes them a year.
Right. So book coaches do work in various phases of where a writer is in their project. So fiction book coaches may well start with a writer when she's at the very earliest part of noodling around with an opening chapter and an idea and a little more. Or in fiction, for example, the coach may agree to review an entire manuscript and figure out where that writer really, really needs to dig in to solve problems. And you're right that yes, some developmental editing does get into some of that, but I really think that book coaches are given a broader array of certainly certified book coaches. We have more very specific tools at our disposal. We have a tool called the Blueprint, which is an incredibly powerful way of drilling down qualitatively into what you're writing and what your point is, and really forcing you to excavate some clarity from the muddle that our writing often is when we're in the middle of it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then the other thing I'm thinking of too is sort of when sometimes authors hire people to do consultations, which is more, well, could be about anything, right? When we do them, often they're about marketing, but sometimes they're about writing and different market ideas, when they're picking their subgenres or trying to market to a subgenre, figuring out which ones are more marketable in terms of what they should target with their writing, right? So a lot of that sounds like could fall under the book coach umbrella as well, because that's something that you would help them figure out during that process. So you're certified in the nonfiction area. So what's the difference, I guess, in terms of what you would do as a book coach with fiction versus nonfiction? I mean, you touched on a tiny bit, but yeah.
Right. There are really key differences. The things that are the same are, a book coach is going to be an accountability partner and help you work through specific tools toward clarity and really understanding your writing goals and what you're writing along the way. But key differences are, as we well know, it can take many, many months or even years to complete a fiction manuscript. And so a coach is going to work a lot with a writer on a lot of structural issues, fiction coach, character motivation, certainly the character arcs, the protagonist's wants and needs. That fiction coach is really going to get down in the trenches with the writer on what's the real backbone of the story, what's the conflict. And this can be a relationship that unfolds over many months. And it may be that there could be pauses while the writer is going off and doing pages, but a lot of fiction coaches hold their clients accountable by saying, all right, well, your next 20 pages are due to me by such and such a date. And they really keep the writer going. And then they're working through those problems as they arise, and through both conversation and some of these, tools that ask a lot of hard questions, and offer things like how to really write an outline kind of from the inside out. There are different ways of working through the typical problems that a fiction writer will encounter, and it kind of gives it a vocabulary and a structure so that the writer and the coach can have those conversations together. Now, on the nonfiction side, there's a lot of different things going on. Certainly with my clients, nonfiction writers often need to come up with a research plan. I mean, what's really going to go into that book? They need to be really clear about why are they the authority to write on this particular topic. And on the nonfiction side, I really press my clients to help clarify what do you have to say that's bringing something fresh to the marketplace of ideas. Because wherever your book sits on the shelf, maybe there are books, maybe it's surrounded by books that are like that. So how is yours going to be different? And why are you the right person to tell that story? So you're really marrying that writer's expertise with a really, really tight structure. And certainly I love working with clients who want to come up with in nonfiction, you don't have to have the whole book written before you market it. In fiction, you really can only market a completed manuscript. So on the nonfiction side, our goal is to create a really killer nonfiction book proposal that could catch the eye of an agent or a publisher. And that's got a lot of very specific elements in it. In addition to a couple sample chapters, you want to have a marketing plan. You want to make it clear what your own platform is. You want to make sure that your idea is expressed really clearly and things of that nature.
I think that's so fascinating. It's one of the things I think that's most important about self-publishing is the concept is king, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. But nonfiction, I can definitely see the value in that, because if you're writing a nonfiction book, as a potential reader, you're looking like, does the person who's writing this have authority in what they're trying to talk about? Does this solve the problem that I'm there? So much of it is conceptual. It's like the book is almost plays second fiddle to the idea of the book. And it seems like that's what you bring to the table with this.
Yes, one of the things that I'd like to think about up front with a nonfiction project is, the writer should get clear on, do you have something absolutely brand new to say? So are you being completely innovative in the ideas that you're bringing into the marketplace? Or are you a contrarian? Are you trying to go against the conventional wisdom in a particular field because you think everybody's gotten it wrong and you're going to set them straight, which can be very compelling. So those are sort of modalities of how to think about um, nonfiction. Or perhaps you're such a subject matter expert and you've been steeped in your field for so long that you simply have acquired insights that you want to share with the public. I'm very interested in commercializing difficult technical stuff. I always say, bring me the nerds, because I would love, for instance, to work with, let's just say, like an astrophysicist, someone who's really steeped in, interstellar science and all this stuff that they're learning from these incredible probes that are going deeper and deeper into space. How does someone who understands, all the science and the physics, how do they talk about this to the public? And I think it's a fascinating translation exercise, often in nonfiction, where you're really trying to translate very technical, deep, jargon-laden information into concepts and ideas that a layperson could not only understand but get excited about. So I love that challenge in nonfiction.
That's like the line of the For Dummies books that I used to read a lot. Yeah, that's interesting. I like the idea of the fact that that as a nonfiction writer, it's possible to. I never really thought about this, but that you could do your marketing before you've written the book, with just some strong sample chapters and a good plan, as opposed to fiction where you've got to have pretty much most of it written. I haven't really thought about it. I guess the only maybe difficulty there is making sure that you're going to be able to finish it. I guess it's one thing to come up with a couple strong sample chapters and then sell those, but then if you can't finish the whole thing.
Great. It's a great point, Craig. One of the things that we do, one of the things that a nonfiction book coach will do with you, is that I would certainly do with you, is we will be creating an annotated table of contents for the entire book. So you will not be going forward with a proposal in the marketplace until you have a really good handle on all the components of the book as a whole. You will understand why each chapter flows to the next one. You'll understand sort of how you're bookending it with your first chapter and your last chapter, and you'll be really clear about how each chapter is structured, not just what the content is. So you will have the confidence that what you need to do to write the rest of the book, and that grasp of your own material will really shine through in a well-written book proposal. So it is a part of the work that we do. And, there are equivalents on the fiction side too. Obviously, it's not so much about a table of contents, but it is about emotional arcs of change, the role of the protagonist and the other characters, how people affect each other, and, what needs to happen kind of on a scene-to-scene basis. So it's there's equivalent ways of working in fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I there's on my long list of to-dos, in terms of, not personal, but business related, I guess, is putting together some sort of a publishing book with all of sort of the information that I've accumulated over the years. And I think that one of the things that I've always thought in terms of how I would start that would be, like you said, a very detailed table of contents to figure out the whole plan and to how it would break down and what kind of things that I would be bringing to the table. So I can totally see that makes a lot of sense in the nonfiction world, whereas when I've written in the past, were all romance fiction books, I would never do that. Sometimes I would plan, what the chapters, sort of the arcs of the chapters, but not to the same level of detail of like really figuring out what it is, So that makes a lot of sense. I think that would be really helpful, especially when you don't have as much experience writing and planning. If you need somebody to help along, that I can see there's a lot of value in that. So
Well, and one of the things that we ask our authors to do is, if you many people know this, but when you go into Amazon, and I think it's probably true with Amazon.uk as well, there's the look inside feature. If you click on the paperback or hardback version of a book, it's not for the Kindle edition. And so on the nonfiction side and on the look inside, you'll almost always be able to see the table of contents. Now, not all those chapters are going to be hyperlinked, of course, because they're not giving you the whole book. But it's so instructive when you're setting out on your own nonfiction journey to find books that you think are somewhat similar to yours and study the table of contents and see, what are they covering? What are they not covering? How granular is it? Is it a 30,000 foot perspective, or are they down in the weeds? Do they seem to be using a lot of data or a lot of surveys, or does it seem to be very anecdotal and sort of case study driven? What are the forms? These are such important things for authors to do as they set out on their own work, because they need to understand the world that they're going to be writing into, but they also need to understand where they can differentiate. And the thing about the table of contents is, chapters are not meant to be, yes, they are discrete, but they're not meant to stand alone in the sense of, well, there's this chapter and then there's this chapter and then there's another chapter. The chapters really should be building on one another in some type of a storytelling or a logical argument fashion. So that's part of the art and science of building that annotated table of contents, is figuring out, even in nonfiction, you want the reader to, in fiction, we talk about how the protagonist has to have an arc of change. They have to start in one place and they have to end somewhere else. In nonfiction, the reader needs an arc of change. So you want the reader to start with some baseline or no knowledge about something, and by the time they've read your book, they have a really different, better, or enlightened understanding of the topic that you're writing about. So your table of contents is really important because it's going to bring them on that journey.
I love that. I love that idea that the reader is the one that needs the arc of change for nonfiction. That's really brilliant.
Yeah, I think there are going to be people listening, and hopefully, if they write nonfiction books, they remember that, because that's like a golden nugget, I think.
Good.
Yeah, and it's true. I've found myself doing the same thing, where I open up the table of contents and see what other people have written, and if you're doing that for research for your novel, it's a lot cheaper to do it that way than to buy every one of those books. And I mean, obviously, you do want to read a few, at least, of your competition, but this allows you to see a lot more than you'd want to purchase yourself.
Well, the other thing I think that every writer should do before they start on a nonfiction book is go to your local bookstore, whether it's an indie bookstore, or in some ways it's almost better to go to, that's just about the last chain standing is Barnes & Noble as a dedicated bookstore. But to go to one of those, if you can, try and find the shelf where you think your book will live, and see what's there, and look at those books physically, and get a sense of where you fit. I think it's a very, very illuminating exercise, because, if you want to write a book about X and you think you've just come up with this brilliant idea, and you go to your bookstore and you see 3 books on the shelf that are darn close to X, you might have to really think hard about, what are you really going to bring to the conversation? And if you don't see X, you might want to really think hard about, why hasn't that book been written? What's going on here? That's another way of thinking about it.
That's true. Yeah, I think in a lot of cases you're not gonna. You might be the first one to think of it, but there might be. You're right. There might be a reason why nobody else has done it before. And I think there's a lot of times you're going to see a lot of the same books of what you're planning on writing. And yes, you can find your own flavor, but sometimes it's also a matter of what your personal what you're bringing to it as the writer, as the authority, as you mentioned before. If you're more of an authority on a specific thing than the other books that are out there, because anyone can write books these days, then you can still go ahead, right? Because you might have the built-in reader base already because of your authority or your celebrity or whatever it is that you're bringing to it. And I think that's a lot of what happens too.
Well, and you raise an important point, which is I sigh before discussing it. In nonfiction, agents are more often than not really looking to see what your author platform is. Do you already have a very, very large following on social media, way up in the thousands or tens of thousands? Are you the kind of person who speaks at big conferences? Can you move books in that kind of a setting? Move meaning sell. Do you have the attention of a built-in audience already, that's part of your credibility and your followership, and they are looking for these kinds of things. But I would never discourage someone who is passionate about their nonfiction work to worry about that overly. I think you should write the book that you are meant to write. And even if you don't have that platform, there are still ways of getting published. There are indie publishers who are not looking at that quite so intently as agents. And while it's true that having a platform is a big deal for getting a non-publishing deal, especially with an agent, I think anyone who has something to say in nonfiction should write it and worry about that secondarily.
And of course, you can self-publish. I mean, that way it doesn't matter.
Yes. Well, and one of the things that I do with clients is, and I think most book coaches do, is we will work with you on the right path to publishing for you. I am going to be starting work with a new client who may well end up self-publishing a memoir from a very interesting life and life path that he has had. And that's a lovely, lovely thing to do because you're accomplishing your goal of expressing yourself, and you are going to be able to share that with audiences that matter to you. And not everybody needs, wants, or should pursue a a six-figure publishing deal that's become a unicorn anyway. And even thought leaders and emerging thought leaders can get a lot out of self-publishing if it's done well with a good marketing plan.
I think that's very true. I think I've experimented with sort of writing nonfiction books and then marketing them through Facebook and stuff like that. And if you do have the following, or if you create the following, that can be in some ways a more profitable approach to take than going to a traditional publisher. And I think you mentioned, it's a big boost if you've already got a huge following in other places. But I guess a book can also be a cornerstone of that. I mean, a lot of people use the book as their lead magnet for other services they offer, like fitness coaches or nutrition coaches and things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you're going to write into that if you're going to write for those purposes, you want to be so clear about what you want the book to do for you and what should be in that book. And if you're going to use it as exactly as you say, kind of as a lead magnet, or to get people to think about you as a service provider, you want to be incredibly clear about what the contents of the book should be. So it's kind of all of a piece. And these are the things you want to work all this out up front, because that table of contents and what's in that book has to really serve your purpose. So you want to be clear about what that purpose is.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, so let's say now we're at the point where the person decides they want to hire a book coach. What's the next step? What do they do? How do they find them, other than obviously yourself? But how would they find the book coach? How did they get started? What kind of commitment of time and price and all that stuff?
Right. Well, let me start by saying that one of the easiest way to find a trained book coach is to go to authoraccelerator.com. That's one word, Author Accelerator. .com, not Accelerator, Accelerator, ACC. And you can have access to certified book coaches in fiction and nonfiction. And there are ways to explore this without any financial commitment on your end to see if it's the right fit for you, to see if you can find a coach who's the right fit. Every coach will spend time with you on an intake call and figuring out whether you're a good fit for each other. So no one's asking anyone to plunk their money down and take a big chance. You can also now begin to Google things like book coach, and some reputable sources should begin to pop up now. Every book coach sets her or his own prices, and many book coaches offer a variety of packages priced at very different levels. There's shorter term work that can be done for a lower dollar amount, and there's longer term hefty work that can be purchased for more. But I will just go out on a limb and speak for almost all book coaches and say that really any coach is certainly willing to have a conversation with you and work with you and figure out what the right solution is for you. But there's a lot of different options and a lot of different ways in.
Right. So they would find, I guess, a whole bunch of coaches, maybe talk to a few to figure out what the best fit is for them and their writing style. I imagine that although there are multiple book coaches that probably could work with any author, sometimes it's a matter of like personality fit too, right?
Yes, it is. It can be personality fit. Some coaches are more laid back than others. I mean, we're people too, right? So some coaches are going to have a more kind of a relaxed style. Some are going to be um, very kind of hard charging and um, really kind of help lay down the law for you. Um, of course, any really good coach is going to adjust to the needs of the client. But yes, I mean, you are fitting personalities together in what becomes a real relationship. And so, of course, you always want to find find the fit that's right for both of you.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot like a fitness coach where, some people like those hard coaches that are like, all right, drop, give me 20, come on, one more, 5 more, and other people are like, I don't want a person like that. They'll piss me off. Like
Yes, yes, Greg, but maybe not quite to the extremes because, excuse me, hopefully, you will not be yelled at like a drill sergeant would yell at a recruit by a book coach. But yes, I mean, I've talked to coaches who they're very forgiving when their clients are not meeting deadlines, and the client's coming back and saying, oh well, I had my mother-in-law here all week and I just really couldn't write, and the coach is like, that's fine, let's just reset that deadline. But then you might have a coach who's like, listen, you're shortchanging yourself here, this isn't going to cut it. I need you to go set aside 3 days and you're going to get those pages to me. And different people need different kinds of motivation. And so I think it just depends on what works for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that, and I'm flip-flopping in my head about how useful, or not how useful, but there's this idea, you had said it earlier, like somebody might say, give me 20 pages by X date or whatever, right? And so as an author, like you said, things come up, stuff happens, etc., and you don't always get it done. And from that perspective, sure, that happens. But then I'm thinking the reason why a lot of people would need the book coach is because they're finding that stuff happens a lot, right? And they're letting it happen a lot. They're looking for these excuses not to write. But the reason why you hire the book coach is so that you will write and you will get it done. You have that accountability partner. And so it's almost like you kind of, it shouldn't matter whether you think you need that or not. You should pretty much always get that, because otherwise, what are you doing, right? Like if you're always making excuses and you're always finding a reason why you can't get the pages, and your coach is like, all right, well, whatever. But then I don't think you're really being helped very much if that's the case, right?
You're absolutely right that really almost every writer really benefits from an accountability partner, but I want to also emphasize the problem-solving nature of the relationship, because as writers, we do encounter problems with our story. There's what I call the muddle in the middle. I'm speaking fiction now because I write fiction. You get to the middle of the book and everything starts to feel real flabby and falling apart, and you're not quite sure where you're going. I mean, you've got problems as a writer. You've got problems with your protagonist. You've got problems with your secondary storyline. You've got problems with pacing, all kinds of things. And so the coach is there to help you solve these problems, both through, i- i- talk therapy. You're talking things through with a really knowledgeable partner, your book coach, but also through some of these tools. Well, let's go back to the tool. Let's go back to the way we did, our outlining process. Let's go back to some of these other things that we did, because of this, then that, which is a really powerful way of looking at motivation linkages and sort of advancing a plot in a book. Because of this, then that happens, and because of that, then this happens, and ways of sort of building in these linkages. And there's tables you can literally fill out to kind of flesh some of this out. So your coach is an accountability partner and a problem solver.
Right. And those things will slow you down too, but those are more legitimate reasons, right? I was thinking more in terms of like, there's always an external reason that you can find that's going to stop you, but that's what you need to figure out and work through. And that's, in terms of the accountability side, what the book coach can really help, as just you sort of point it to you and say, listen, you're always finding these things that are stopping you from writing, and it's not story related, right? So let's work through those. Let's figure out maybe a better time, a new schedule for your writing, right? And then there's also the writing issues that might stop you, but those are more legit things that technically the book coach can help with. So I think that's really helpful. I think too, you have to have a level of self-awareness of what your life is and what you can do. Like I said, I would love to write a book on. I haven't written in a couple of years because Hidden Gems keeps me really busy, and that's part of the problem. Is and I know that, which is why I haven't started. And a coach wouldn't really help me in that sense, because the time just isn't there for me to find. When it is, and I can do it, and I know that I can do it because the time is there, then a coach can help me if I end up still making excuses. But you have to have that level of awareness of how possible it is and what's going on in your life before.
Yeah. Yes, you're right, and you're being realistic. But you can also engage with a coach to go through what we call a mini blueprint process, which helps you, in a relatively short amount of time, put some real meat on the bones for what you think your book is and who it's for and where it's going and what it's going to accomplish. And if you were to do a process like that, you might get so excited about getting your ideas out onto the surface in a structured way that you might realize, I have to write this book, therefore I'm going to find time to write this book. I mean, sometimes we don't find time because we're not yet that motivated about the need to write, or the passion to write. Sometimes if you find the passion for the project, then you can find the time.
True. And sometimes when those ideas are more solidified, it helps to let them for me, it helps to let them sort of percolate in my head a little bit, so, and then I come back to it and it's easier to write. So let's talk a bit about you and how did you get started into this? I know that you're a fiction writer, yet you've got certified in nonfiction book coaching. So what was this path that you took like?
I was going to ask as well, like the certification specifically. I mean, that seems like a very specific path to take. So I'd love to hear about that as well. Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you. And
yes.
Just let you speak.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Those are two separate questions, and I'm happy to answer both in the time that we have. For me, it's a marriage of two converging trends in my life for decades, and I may as well just admit it's decades. I made my living in the nonfiction world. I was a journalist both in print and public radio. I was an executive speechwriter. Did some cabinet level speechwriting in the Obama administration. I did a lot of pretty complicated government communications work in DC. I've also done a lot of communications for nonprofits and state government as well. And so I've touched a lot of different parts of the nonfiction elephant, as it were, and feel really secure in my ability to understand and shepherd through writing that might deal with complex technical factual type material, but make it very, very accessible. Now, on the flip side, because I've been writing books and plays over the last dozen years or so, um, I think I understand storytelling as well. And how you really need to read and engage a reader through story in one form or another. So when you mush those two together, book coaching becomes a very natural fit for me because I also love supporting and helping other writers on their own journey. Um, so I do some other training and workshops and that kind of thing. So I love that kind of engagement. So it really all comes together for me in one nice, neat package, all wrapped up in a pretty bow.
And how
And
many
then
authors have you helped so far? I was going to ask.
My coaching practice is quite new, so I have a small client load, but that's also by design because I spend a lot of time with each client on our calls and prepping for our calls and providing a lot of feedback on their material. And I really need to leave time for writing and marketing my own books. So to Craig's point, it's about how much time do we have. So I'm managing a small roster of clients by design. Some book coaches have a really really pretty big caseload. It just depends on how you want to design your business.
It seems to me that it would be more reassuring if my coach didn't have a huge number of clients for that very reason.
Well, a really good coach, you'll feel like their only client. You'll never know.
and then back to Roland's question though, what's involved in the certification process?
So Author Accelerator offers a rigorous track either in fiction or nonfiction for a fee. And I'm not going to state fees because fees can change, and I don't want to say a number that's not the right number anymore. And when you sign up for either or both tracks, because you can do either or both, although I don't know if you need to do them sequentially or if you can take them at the same time. It would be a lot to do both. I would say pick a track, pick fiction or nonfiction. Um, you then get access to a very extensive series of learning modules. It's all online and self-paced. There are practicums that you must complete. It's quite rigorous. It takes coaches varying amounts of time to get through the course, depending on how much they push themselves. I mean, it took me over a year for completion, but I also had some obligations in the middle there that pulled me away for a couple of months. But it's both. It's self-paced, using a lot of these modulars, which are very rich in content, both video and written materials, as well as these practicums that are hands-on because you are working with a client, doing some of the real work. And one of the best parts about doing this through Author Accelerator is that you then have entree to a network of coaches and coaching resources and an incredible knowledge base that really helps you, as well as opportunities to really build and grow a practice. So the support on the business side once you're certified. So it's a really comprehensive soup to nuts program. And for anyone who feels drawn to this work, I cannot recommend the program highly enough.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah,
and by the way, there are many, many coaches in the US and throughout the UK and other parts of Europe. You can do this from anywhere, and I've been on Zoom calls with coaches all over the world.
well, I mean, in our connected world, especially post pandemic, it almost doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you can, if you have access to the internet, then you have access to a world of people and knowledge that's really helpful. So I mean, sure, I think in some cases it is helpful to have somebody that is maybe localized to you, even though you don't necessarily meet them. But if there are differences in markets that you're trying to market to, or in just localization issues. So maybe it's helpful in some cases to have somebody who is, if you're in the UK, to have a UK-based one. But I think in general, though, I think for a lot of people, a book coach in the UK, if you're living in the US, is still going to be just as valid, right?
Agreed.
So, well, that's great. So, and then your stuff that you've written, your genre. Why don't you tell us more about your personal writing that you do?
Yes, I am definitely a multi-genre author. I basically find the story that I want to tell, and then I decide the best way to tell it. And a genre be damned has become my motto. So I actually did just release a paranormal romance, which I'm kind of always quick to say it's fairly meaty. A lot of men have read it and have enjoyed it. Many people still think that romance is throwaway fluff, and there's so much being written in the genre, which that's just not true. So the Nighthawkers is getting some very, very nice reviews, and I'm really happy about that. And that's available now. And then later this summer, I have a dystopian mystery thriller coming out from Regal House Publishing called The Potrero Complex. And it's a dark look at a mystery that arises from um, a society that is breaking down a few years after a terrible pandemic, not our pandemic, an even worse pandemic. So it's mystery, but it's also speculative in a way.
Hopefully not too speculative. I think I'm done with the pandemic now.
Yeah, in the novel, the pandemic is over. It's over. No, it's a book about aftermath and consequences and impacts on society. And if I could say quickly, I realized that I'm not a futurist, but I really did predict in the novel before it was in the news. I predicted some of the civil unrest and threats to democracy that we are experiencing. I predicted some of that. I predicted some of the economic and resource shortages that's going on. Big effects on the job market. It's all in the book. So.
So maybe that should be moved into the non-fiction section.
Actually, I hope not.
Yeah, well, maybe you should be a futurist then. So maybe that's another genre you can try to conquer.
I was just thinking, yeah, maybe you don't have any choice in being a futurist. You write it and then it comes true, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm a futurist then.
Yeah, well, then start writing some more positive stuff.
Right, and that's a great idea for a book right there. Someone who makes up predicting the future, but everything that they predict comes true.
That is actually
kind of a cool idea.
There we go. We'll have to. If anyone ends up writing that, you owe us 25 cents for every copy.
I feel like that. I feel like there was a children's book or movie that was like that. I feel like I remember seeing a trailer years ago for something like that the kids wanted to see, but
nothing new under the sun.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, Amy, we are coming up to the end of our hour. It has been so fascinating talking to you. I think you brought so much context to what it is people need to think about when they embark on a non-fiction book. I mean, I know I've written a couple of non-fiction books because I was so enthused with the subject at first, and then I realized I was like on that Dunning-Kruger curve where you have a certain amount of ignorance and you think you know everything, and then as you learn more, you realize how little you know. And then I was like, oh, these books, I'm really not an authority on these things. So it sounds like you really make non-fiction authors think about what it is they're bringing to the table and the path of that. And that seems to have enormous value.
That's exactly right. And that's the value of the coach, to really help you sort of stay honest and true to what you're trying to accomplish and make sure that you get it done the right way.
That's what Craig, you're going to say.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I think that you've really sort of given a really good overview too of everything that Book Coach does. Never mind just nonfiction. You've covered a lot of the fiction stuff too. And I think there's obviously a lot of overlap there in terms of how they can help you. So anyone listening to this is who is interested in the idea of Book Coach, I think they're probably going to be ready to dive in and at least to go onto the websites and check out what they have to offer. Personally, like I said, I think this is something that, when I'm ready, might even benefit me to help get me going. I've never written a nonfiction book, just it's all been fiction, right? So there's probably a lot there that would help me as well.
Well, this has been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation. You have been wonderful hosts and you ask great questions.
Oh, that's always nice to hear. Well, thank you so much, Amy. And we will, of course, drop links down below to all of the websites that Amy's been talking about. So make sure to check those out. leave us a comment, leave Amy a comment. If you haven't clicked that like button, make sure you do so. If you're not already a subscriber, wherever you're listening to this, please make sure you sign up as well. Thank you one more time, Amy, for all of the valuable insight you brought to this. And we will be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. Stay tuned.